dispensing with informed consent. What does it mean? According to American Psychological Association, APA, Ethical Principles of Psychologists and Code of Conduct, psychologists can dispense with informed consent for a research under certain circumstances and conditions which are, first, research do not cause distress or harm and involves a. Study of normal educational practices, curricula, or classroom management methods conducted in educational settings. B. Anonymous questionnaires, naturalistic observations, or archival research for which disclosure of responses would not place participants at risk of criminal or civil liability or damage their financial standing, employability, or reputation, and confidentiality is protected. C. Study of factors related to job or organization effectiveness conducted in organizational settings for which there is no risk to participants' employability, and confidentiality is protected. Second, where otherwise permitted by law or federal or institutional regulations.
Next, let's take a look at understanding the ethical standard. In this context, the term dispensing means manage without or omit. Hence, psychologists can carry out a research involving participants without their informed consent, but only under the strict ethical guidelines. In general, if a psychologist wants to dispense informed consent, then the research conducted should not cause any harm or distress to the participant, in under all circumstances or conditions. There are 4 circumstances that can be considered for dispensing with informed consent. The first situation is research conducted in educational institution like school. Studies of normal educational practices that do not need informed consent are comparisons of different instructional methods and classroom management techniques or evaluation of educational placements. Some studies that does not apply to these standard, such as studies designed to describe or test hypotheses regarding the relationship between student personality trait or mental health disorders and school performance. And investigator-initiated school-based programs such as drug prevention programs, may not be considered a normal educational practice or part of the school curricula. It is because it does not fall under normal educational practice and could compose invasion of privacy. Second is, anonymous, naturalistic or archival research. Informed consent is not required for investigations using anonymous questionnaires, naturalistic observations, or archival research when confidentiality is protected. Disclosure of responses would not place participants at legal, financial, or social risk. Psychologists should avoid dispensing if informations collected, if known, can put participants in risk, such as criminal activity, substance abuse and so on. Make sure uniqueness of the community studied does not affect the anonymity of the participants, and may omit for naturalistic observation in Internet if participants do not have expectation of privacy in individual responses. Studies and investigator does not influence the discussion to produce specific responses. Next. Third is, studies of job or organization effectiveness. Recognizes organizations' right and obligation to use psychologists' research competence to study aspects connected to work or organizational efficiency as long as confidentiality is adequately protected. Research participation does not pose a direct risk to an individual's current employment status, and applied to dispensing with informed consent to research directly linked to a specific organization's needs and not to studies designed to test general hypotheses regarding organizational effectiveness. Lastly is, when dispensing with informed consent is permitted by law or federal or institutional regulations. This standard permits psychologists to dispense with informed consent for reasons where consent waiver is permitted by law or federal or institutional regulations. And in such instances, researchers bear the burden of demonstrating that such conditions are met.
You might wonder why and when psychologists use this standard. This standard is done in exceptional situations where obtaining consent is impractical, impossible, or would compromise the validity of the research results. research situations where dispensing with informed consent can be considered when minimal risk studies such as anonymous surveys and observational research in public setting and deception studies where deception might be necessary to obtain valid results. If the researcher uses deception technique, they should be informed of the deception and the nature of the experiment as soon as possible. To enhance our understanding further, let us look into an issue that rose from the misconduct of dispensing of informed consent. Let's begin with a case briefing for the Tuskegee syphilis study. The Tuskegee syphilis study took place in Macon County, in Alabama, USA. The whole study was endorsed and carried on by the United States of Public Health Services. The study was conducted between 1932 to 1972, for the course of whole 40 years. Around 600 participants were involved in the study, 399 of them being infected with syphilis while the other 200 participants were the control group for the study. Mind that, the study involved a large group of black men as the participants. The purpose of the study conducted was to observe the properties and consequences of untreated syphilis in a natural circumstance for black African American male. However, the following study suffered a lot of complications towards the participants. This includes the neglect of the participants' autonomy rights as they were not given an opportunity to withdraw themselves. They were also not aware of the implications of the study. Participants were also not informed of their condition. Therefore, they suffered the consequences without being able to seek the proper treatment for their disease. Most importantly, participants were deliberately denied access to this treatment despite having penicillin for cure, leading to unnecessary suffering and, in some cases, severe health complications, including death. Therefore, being unaware of their condition, participants with infected syphilis had transferred the disease to their sexual partners, causing the people around them to be infected as well. However, records from the study were not stored, therefore it is estimated that the number of survivors were from 76 to 111 casualties, and the number of dead participants were between 28 to 101. Next we are going to take a quick at the ethical issues that surfaced from the study. First and foremost, the major ethical issue faced by the study was violation of dispensing of informed consent. To begin, this study was conducted by the United States of Public Health Services. Therefore, according to the ethical manner, any study or research that is regulated or supervised by a federal authority would not require informed consent because they perceived that the study would not cause any harm, so authorities would not need to present informed consent towards the participant to assent. However, in this case of study that was carried out, the authority have violated the ethical manner in which the study that conducted had caused harm and distress to its participants. The participants involved had been succumbed to various health concerns and resulted even in death. Even when the study is constituted under a government agency, the failure to protect the participants from any sort of endangerment is strictly against ethics code. It is obvious that the study held violated the acts of dispensing of informed consent. Besides that, another ethical issue that was associated with this research was deception. The whole study started with deception. Participants were informed that they were receiving special free treatment. They told the participants that they were providing treatment to treat bad blood. The authority took advantage of the term bad blood, which the African American male associated it with common ailments. Participant that took part in this study was deceived and misguided because they were not given proper diagnosis of syphilis. The participants were also presented with spinal taps, which the researchers had claimed was a treatment and described it as spinal shots. The poor participants were not only not informed consent of the study but was rather deceived by the nature of the study. Lastly, the next ethical issue is violation of beneficence and non-maleficence. The study violated the ethical principles of beneficence, which is promoting well-being, and non-maleficence is avoiding harm. The participants were denied access to life-saving treatment despite its availability, resulting in prolonged suffering and avoidable health complications. Although penicillin at the time of study was considered a cure for syphilis, the researchers were reluctant to treat the infected participants. The authority had failed to not only avoid causing harm, but also refused to give treatment for their diagnosis.
Next, let's look at the ways to solve issues regarding dispensing with informed consent for research. The first way is getting permission from Institutional Review Board, IRB. The IRB is concerned with safeguarding human subjects' welfare, rights, and privacy. The IRB has the authority to approve, exclude, disapprove, monitor, and encourage changes in all research operations that fall within its area of influence, as stated by federal regulations as well as institutional policy. So, it is the responsibility of IRB to determine whether a research fits the requirement for abandon informed consent. It means that the individual psychologist or experimenter does not have the authority to ignore informed consent in research. Hence, experimenters conducting research that fits the requirement for dispensing informed consent still get necessary IRB approval for such exclusions. The IRB also states that even though informed consent was not necessary, the researchers must include a statement describing the purpose, anonymous nature of the study and their contact information. The next way will be to rethink when the research involves participants who are legally incapable of giving informed consent. Once got the dispensing with informed consent, hence guardian permission for research in school settings is not needed. Besides, state laws, federal laws and parental expectations must be considered by psychologists regarding parental involvement in children's participation in normal educational practices before deciding whether to dispense with parental permission or student assent. Also, psychologists must be familiar with the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act and federal regulations that require parental permission to the child's school records, whether parental permission for the evaluation was required or obtained. The last way is identifying the main purpose of the study. The psychologist should know what the study exactly tried to measure and what is the impact of the study on research participants. It would be unethical to ignore informed consent for studies that use biological data because assessing one's mental health or physiological response without consent can cause a violation of privacy information. In addition, a psychologist who plans to conduct research like drug prevention should know that it may not be considered normal educational or organizational practice. Therefore, it does not meet the criteria for omitting with informed consent in research.
To summarize, dispensing with informed consent for research can be defined as the act of performing research or experiments on participants without obtaining their informed consent. Generally, researches that involves humans should protect the participants' rights, autonomy and safety. It is morally required to obtain informed consent to safeguard the values of respect for others, goodness and justice. Yet, there are some circumstances in which dispensing with informed consent for research is applicable, such as research do not cause distress or harm and involves certain requirements regarding the safety of the participants. Besides, it is also practiced when permitted by law or federal or institutional regulations. However, the researcher or the psychologist conducting an experiment using human beings should adhere to their responsibilities to not violate the ethical manner, as it is capable of raising issues and harming the involved individuals. There's also several ways to solve issues regarding dispensing with informed consent for research. Firstly, get permission from the Institutional Review Board. Moreover, rethink when the research involves participants who are legally incapable of giving informed consent. Lastly, identify the main purpose of the study. Therefore, dispensing with informed consent for research is a delicate ethical dilemma that requires careful thought and respect to moral precepts. While there might be situations where getting explicit consent is impossible or impractical, however, safeguarding the rights, independence, and security of research participants should always come first. Transparency in decision-making and ongoing participant communication are also essential components of ethical research conduct.